Well, good morning, everybody. I wanted to say welcome. We are having another WACCT webinar today. We've got another one of our gubernatorial candidates with us, Megan Degenfelder, who's the current Superintendent of Public Instruction, and I know many of you know her. And we've worked with her in a lot of ways through our various roles across the colleges. So I wanted to welcome Megan here today. What we do in this sort of environment, Megan, is provide the opportunity for trustees. We might have some presidents joining or other staff at the colleges. And a lot of people will probably be watching later because we do post them. And it's just an opportunity to share information and ask questions. And so that is my goal today. I hope that folks are ready to ask some questions. Of course, I will. I'm never at a lack for piping or joining in and asking a question if there needs to be some. So I'm ready and to do that as well. But what I thought we would do is allow Megan to have a few minutes of her own time to tell us what she'd like to tell us, and then we can open it up for questions. So Megan, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Erin, and thanks all for making the time. I know how busy schedules are. We're about to start school, and of course, I'm aware that all of your trustees are working individuals and do this as a service to their communities. So thanks very much for having me. I'm actually in Riverton today. We kicked off the Native American Education Conference with CWC yesterday, and Dr. Tyndall and that crew have just been great partners. I think it was our 17th annual that started, so pretty great. I'll start, I guess, by providing a little bit of background about myself for those who don't know me. I know I've worked with many of the trustees in colleges, particularly over the last couple of years. But provide that and some of my initiative areas, and then would love to get into the weeds when it comes to our community colleges, because this is something that I believe very strongly in. My father served for years on the Casper College Trustees, was president of that board. And so our community colleges are incredibly important to our education pipeline. And I think we have a lot of issue areas that we can tackle together. So my story begins in Casper. That's where I grew up. I'm sixth generation Wyomingite. My family, they were farmers, actually, first in the Torrington area in the 1800s. And then when my grandfather was young, they moved west of Casper. And so that's where my family ranch was, and grew up going to public schools, went to the University of Wyoming, which is where I met my husband. And then earned a master's degree in economics, actually went overseas, spent 3 years in China, which was an eye-opening experience, and then came back and built my career in the mineral industry. I worked first for a coal company up in Gillette, and then most recently, before I ran for superintendent, worked in the oil and gas business for a company in the Wamsutter area. So then made that jump from energy to education. A lot of folks say, "Wow, those things are not really connected," but I would argue that they very much are. I think if we have affordable, reliable energy and you have a strong public education system, that's really the ticket to achieving the American dream and having a strong Wyoming, but also a strong country. And so made that jump because was struggling in the oil and gas industry to hire students that had the skills and credentials that we needed. And so really wanted to come in and focus on reform in education, largely centered around career preparedness. So that's career and tech ed, vocational trades, which you all know a lot about, and our community colleges have really stepped up big time in this area. But also to focus on literacy reform, which we were able to finally achieve in this past legislative session. Also focusing on ensuring greater civics education, parental rights, and focus in those areas. So that's what I've been doing for the past 3.5 years. I'm really excited to see where we can head with continuing to build the education ecosystem and how we have greater relationships from K-12 into higher ed, that higher ed space between the community colleges and the University of Wyoming. I think we've made a lot of improvements in the last few years, but we still have a lot of work to go on that. So, why am I running for governor? I'm running for governor because I'm tired of young people leaving the state. I believe that we need our youth to ensure that we have a future here in Wyoming. And so how do we do that? Because politicians have been talking about that for a very long time. How do we keep our young people here? Number one, it starts with building a strong economy, ensuring that we have good, high-paying jobs here in the state of Wyoming. That, of course, because of our tax structure, starts with our mineral industry. And having spent my career there, that's really where I want to build so we can produce more energy, which leads to greater outcomes for all of our industries in the state. But also how we can build out that value chain. So, looking at areas like greater processing of our minerals, manufacturing, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And then, of course, really playing to our other strengths of our legacy industries, whether it's agriculture, tourism, and then building out future industries like technology, digital assets, and those type of things. So good high paying jobs, of course, is number one. But if you have a great job opportunity and you can't find somewhere to live, then it doesn't really matter. And so looking at how we make our communities more affordable. And I go back to, the foundational aspects, housing and healthcare. Those two things are really paramount to that. And so looking at how do we increase availability of housing, but also making sure that it's affordable. And then as it relates to healthcare, how do we reduce the overall cost of healthcare, but also access? Because we have healthcare deserts across the state, across our communities that have to be addressed. And then overall, just cost of living, tax burden on our people here in the state. So then having a strong economy, of course, I think often what gets lost in that is education. And I think, it would be beneficial for many more governors in America to really be focused on education because you can have some of these short-term fixes and all of those previous items that I talked about. But if we're not at the same time building a strong workforce pipeline, a strong education system, then that will be very short-lived. And so you all know that the ticket to being able to have generational change in the state is really through education. And so continuing to prioritize on those areas that I discussed as a superintendent, but then building even greater in the governor's office, unique opportunity to bring together workforce and industry. And we've started to build this with the Wyoming Business Alliance, with WIP, of how do we create a system of connection between business and industry and our students. As the coach of the UW women's rugby team, I often talk to my seniors that are leaving. And my question, of course, is why are you leaving Wyoming? And their answer is always, there's not a job for me here. But then you go talk to our businesses and they're struggling to fill positions. So there's this gaping disconnect that exists that I believe is our role at the state to solve. How do we connect those two? And then it's also about building in higher education with K-12. And again, we've done a lot of great work there, but I think we've only just begun. And so how do we have a streamlined system? How do we make sure that we're talking about community colleges in just as great of a light as our university? And again, we've made progress, but I think still a ways to go there. And I think we'll get into, or I hope that we get into talking about how do we identify sustainable funding for community colleges? How do we look at things like dual and concurrent enrollment? I think that's one of our most major issues as we kind of build K-12 in with our community colleges. And as we're seeing with this $20 million appropriation from the legislature, how do we ensure that kids are able to take those courses? How do we make sure they're prepared to enter them? And then using things like our SLEDS data, using things like the digital wallet, how are we actually building that out so that it's not just taking these courses for nothing, but it's really this pathway where they're going to do better in their ultimate career. So a lot of discussions, I think, to be had as it relates to our community colleges. And then last, I'll just touch on, and then I'd love to get to questions and discussion, modernizing state government. So, oftentimes in all of the, political theater and rhetoric, we forget that really the major job of the governor is to govern and is to lead our state agencies. And I don't believe that we've actually had real transformational change in state government since Governor Hathaway. And that's something I'm very much interested in doing of how do we rethink how we provide, those state agency functions better to our people? How do we streamline some of those functions? And so very anxious to do that. And having run one of the state's larger state agencies the last 3.5 years, I believe that I can really hit the ground running in order to do that. So that's kind of general overview of myself, of some of my priority areas. I really believe that we're at a crossroads in the state. And I believe that Wyoming can and should lead boldly, unapologetically, think outside the box. move beyond status quo, and really lead the country because that's what we're good at in Wyoming. Harkening back to when we granted women the right to vote. That's the type of leadership that I believe Wyoming is capable of, that ensures that we don't just survive, but we really thrive, and the country follows suit. So, Erin, that's probably more than you bargained for, but we can open it up at this point.
No, it's great. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. We can open it up. We do have a few presidents on the line. We have some trustees. Kathy, I see your hand. And folks, you can raise your hand or you can just do this, whatever works. Go ahead, Kathy.
Megan, I'm very glad you mentioned about our youth leaving the state, and this is a big problem. But in your conversations with your seniors, when they say there's no jobs for me here, how do you have a plan for getting information from these seniors? What kind of jobs are they wanting that would keep them here in Wyoming?
Mhm. Great question. And I think it starts with exposure. And it's really simple in that way. And I think that starts in our K-12 system of how are we exposing our youth to opportunities. You could be in one corner of the state and you have no idea, right, about the coal industry, or you could be in another corner and have no idea about the trona industry, because you don't have exposure to it, or what's available there, or tourism in another part of the state. And so one thing that we're really working on, and I think is going to continue and into my work as governor, is changing our accountability system. And again, this is K-12, and we'll get a little bit more into higher ed. But our accountability system largely just measures test scores. And so, our districts aren't really incentivized in that way to have work-based learning, to have internship opportunities, to align standards to those programs so that our kids actually get exposure and know what's even out there for them. And then I think that continues as we build that pipeline and as we look at things like the digital wallet and how this is kind of a larger ecosystem, into our community colleges and our university of what those pathway options are, having more of the experiential learning. And we're seeing that a lot of kids, they want that hands-on learning. We've increased our CTE concentrators by over 100%. And so the opportunity there for them to really explore and to know what pathway options are available. And a lot of that then is connecting our businesses with our education system. And I think both want to connect, but sometimes there's a missing link there. You've got counselors, they're working their tails off and just to, deal with mental health counseling or to give, the pathways, but then to have that conduit, a job coach, so to speak, that then is partnering with businesses that are also willing. And then you have to give them kind of a how-to guide of how do I meaningfully have kids involved in my company without bogging me down, with ensuring that we're up to date on insurance and those type of things. And so that's really that missing link, I think, that exists there. And that's our students K-12 all the way through higher education.
Thank you.
Do we have another question? I have one if someone doesn't have one.
I'd be happy to answer a question. Good morning, Ms. Degenfelder. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. So my question circles back to some of what you were talking about. And I know you and I briefly visited when you were here for a town hall and mentioned your strong support for the university, which is great, but that two-year colleges were meant for those who weren't college bound. And so I'm curious,
Oh.
has that sentiment changed? How will you promote and how will you work with the community colleges who are the drivers for the skilled workforce? We're an important element in this state. And how will you work with us to ensure funding, to ensure we're stable, to ensure we can continue to drive the workforce of an ever-changing and transforming economy in the great state of Wyoming?
Absolutely. And sorry if it was indicated that way. I don't think that our community colleges mean that a kid is not, college bound. I think there's different options there, right? As the skilled trades and those certification programs. But then so many of our kids start out with 2 years in community colleges and then move to our universities. And so it's a really strong pipeline for so many kids, and in many, cases more affordable. And so I've always believed that. And like I said, I mean, had family that was involved with community college system. And so that I think is equally as important, if not more than our university system, honestly, for the future of the state. And so sustainable funding, which I mentioned there at the beginning, I think we've got to approach that because it is just kind of this up and down every single budget session, having community colleges fight for their lives. And we really haven't addressed what that sustainable funding source or formula is. And I think that desperately has to be done. And so, anxious to visit with you all of kind of how you're looking to the next budget session. But I think that's huge. And particularly as we look at reductions in property taxes, how that can go up and down. And then I mentioned with dual and concurrent of what that future looks like and where that funding is going to come from. We can't just, be reliant on a one-time appropriation, right, from the legislature. It's kind of looking at long-term, how are we actually going to fund this?
Might I ask a follow-up? That was a great point on property tax. And the property tax reduction, of course, impacts different counties differently.
Mhm.
Some of our colleges receive up to 60% of their funding from property tax. And it's going to be very painful should this constitutional ballot pass. So help me understand where your stance is on that. Do you support that constitutional ballot measure? Are you working against it? Or are you working for it? So if you can help me understand your stance on it, I appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah. And I've always said, I want property tax as low as possible, but I also am not willing to jeopardize our basic goods and services. And then that's, if you want low property tax, but you also want the fire truck to show up if it's in flames. And we talk about our senior centers, our community colleges. And so, if we're moving in that direction, we need to ensure that we are backfilling that money. And there's been a lot of talk of sales tax switching to that. I don't think that necessarily gets it done because you're just, robbing Peter to pay Paul. And that's where I always go back to we've got to produce more energy in the state to have an actual revenue source that can do that. We've done an okay job, but there's a lot more potential. I mean, having worked in the industry, I've experienced that firsthand of how do we provide more development, which leads to more revenue. But then to your point, how do we ensure that hardship counties that don't have that revenue, how do we ensure that there is direct distribution spread across the state? How do you build up things like community consensus grants, MRG, have that provided to communities? And that's where I say, I think we have to develop with the legislature a sustainable revenue source for community colleges, because that's where this is just up and down and you have colleges that are all over the map. And that's really what we have to achieve.
I'll pipe in a little bit on that if I can. So one, when we were talking to the legislature over the last few years, and there's no doubt that there have been dramatic increases across the state, and in some parts of the state more than others in terms of property taxes, and some of that targeted relief and maybe short-term relief was absolutely needed. A message that I was trying to relate, and a lot of trustees were trying to say, is we need to think about this cumulatively. We can't just think of pass one bill and that did this, then this did this, and this did this. There is a cumulative impact. And how do they all fit together? If this is, so there's a few thoughts going through my mind here. One, if this initiative goes through, the impact to the colleges is already $13 million from what's legislatively been passed. When we are quite literally, I like to say, digging in the couch for change to get another $5 million to the entire state funding, $13 million for those local revenues, which are the most sustainable and stable part of the local funding, is now going to be at the whim of who's elected in the legislature. So I'm curious to know when you talk about sustainable funding, we're taking away potentially a very important element of local control, and then possibly taking it to a more volatile resource when it's at the legislative level. So I'd like your thoughts on that. I was at a board meeting with one of the colleges yesterday where this idea of what if we get rid of all residential property taxes? And then if we backfill or come up with another funding source, how sustainable can that be? So kind of a lot packed in there, but it's really on people's minds. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think that's where we need to look at something along the lines of formula funding. that is longer term. So you're not just having a given appropriation every single legislature, and you have newly electeds that come in and are switched out, after a couple of years. And so interested in that. I mean, you look at how we fund K-12 and some of those backfills, if that school foundation program account goes below zero, then we tap into the LSRA. And so, some of those formula funding, I think could be beneficial so that it can, be longer term and you're not just having to fight in that way. And so curious, have you guys talked about if that's an option there of a formula funding that is kind of enshrined statutorily?
Do you want me to take that? Does anyone else want to chime in on that?
And does that take away local control, right? Or is that a better thing because we're not having to go every single time?
So there's a couple of things you should know, and we've been all over talking about this for years, as you know. The Community College Commission is currently putting together the bones, the structure of a deep dive in this space. I know we've had sustainable funding committees before. The most robust one happened in 19, and what happened in 20 was the pandemic. And so that whole process kind of got derailed, so to speak. And so we're back at it again, looking at all of those things. We've talked about some sort of a trigger, so to speak, if things go below this and that. If local mills don't meet the needs, et cetera. So, but we really caution against substituting one tax for another, and you know how that goes. So, they're not apples to apples. And the local control element is something that I know a lot of trustees are concerned about. But they're locally elected, and in some states they're not. So, for here in Wyoming, these are folks who are talking to people in their grocery stores, their neighbors. These are, and you know that better than anyone. But that is something that's really important to the colleges, is keeping that local element. So any other colleges or folks want to chime in on that notion particularly?
Well, and certainly President Watson joined in too. I know our trustees are in Campbell County, right? We're standing up a new college. We're standing up a college in a county that is the highest mill assessed valuation in the state of Wyoming. And I would argue, when I tell other colleagues from different states what our mill is worth, they're like, "Oh, that's awesome." But the flip side of that is we can't touch state funding until we assess four. If we assess four, it feels almost as though we are overtaxing our citizens, yet we leave almost $20 million in reimbursements on the table. So major maintenance, capital construction, health, retirement, we can't get those reimbursements, which of course Campbell County pays a big chunk of mineral severance tax. So money flowing out of Campbell County, we can't get flowed back in unless we assess four. So I think there's opportunity for significant look at all those statutes. Statutes still say we only have 7 community colleges, right? Federal policy has changed. We don't need to be with a regional accreditor anymore. So I think that there's a wide swath of work that needs to be done on our statutes, but funding is a major element that we need to look at. I am a little concerned with the conversation of backfill, because once you start tapping into the LISRA, it's my understanding if that drops below a certain level, then the state's not required to fund K-12. That's a concern. Our K-12 system is extremely important, not only to us, but to the great state. So I'm a little concerned with the conversation about backfill. So,
Yep.
President Watson, have I missed something?
Well, and I mean, to that point, you can't rob Peter to pay Paul, which is kind of the easy thing here. And I think that's where we start talking about, sales tax and different funding streams. And then we start talking about our permanent funds, which folks have talked about, and you start just, robbing from the permanent funds. That doesn't give us a long-term solution. And you're right with K-12, if LSRA drops below a certain point, then it does start to be prorated. And that's where we get into a lot of trouble. And so at the end of the day, I mean, we need more revenue at the same time. And that's where I've been bullish on, and we have to produce more energy. We have to get revenue from somewhere, because it's impossible without it.
Kathy, go ahead.
Well,
Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
I'm really glad that Janelle brought up the statutes because, like, I've read them many times, but if the state came up with a sustainable funding formula, I would imagine at the same time the statutes would have to take a deep dive into the statutes, which would be a long-term process, I would think. So,
Well, and
yeah,
that's what a lot of this takes, right? And Aaron's been around the block with some of this of kind of these studies that we continue to do, but we have to ensure that there's action on the backside. And I think that that's a strong partnership with the executive branch and the legislature. We can't be at gridlock, and because we got to get something through. And we've been talking about sustainable funding for years and years. We've been talking about updating these statutes, but the work has finally got to come in and got to be able to work with all different groups of the legislature. And that's what I've been able to do as superintendent and would take into this role of how do we bring people together on this to come up with real solutions and not just a band-aid approach, because that's not going to get us very far.
I think I'll expand on this a little bit, Megan. So, you mentioned earlier the education ecosystem. And we do have a new president over the hill from where I live, and we several of us are going to get to spend some more quality time with President Reeves in Riverton next week. And so I know we're all really looking forward to that. Can you just tell me a little bit more about what your thoughts on what does that term mean, education ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's that greater partnership. And like I said in the last, I guess it's been year or two. I think it was good to bring together, the commission folks with the university trustees and start to have, greater conversation about that so that we're not always just competing. One thing that's really struck me is a lot of times the conversation is just about growing enrollment. And of course, right, we need funding from tuition there. But then I think that just inherently has created competition and conflict for students. And so if we can kind of recenter on how we're working together on some of these programs and where who's doing what, I think that could be really beneficial. We've come a long way, with transferability of credits. That used to be a, just really difficult task. So like I said, we've done a lot of progress, but I still think how do we make sure that conversation and collaboration is consistent, not just kind of a one-time thing where trustees got together, but actually that is kind of memorialized and that's how we operate moving forward.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I, in fact, reminded some of our folks that it was with President Lori Nichols. It was the first time at that time all seven presidents met with the president of the University of Wyoming. First time.
First time.
So that wasn't that long ago, right? So we still have some work to do. I love the idea of we I like the idea of getting away from just the enrollments. That's not what it's all about. The colleges have a really great story when we talk about completion and those success rates. And I think that I would love to have that, discussed a little bit more. One thing that was interesting during the legislative session was, UW was facing $40 million cuts, absolutely horrible. And the colleges were doing our best to say, hey, it takes all of us. You can't cut the university like that. And so we're communicating with them and their trustees too to say these property tax cuts that hit the colleges matter in the same way for us. So I hope the story, in your conversations too, is that we need all of us to be successful.
Yep, that's right. It really is. It's that's where I say it's an education ecosystem, and K-12 has to do well at the same time as community colleges and the university, and so it should be more of a partnership in that way. And it's unfortunate when the legislature starts just talking about arbitrary cuts because they're angry about little microcosms. And then I see that as the executive branch has got to do a better job of that discussion and with the trustees and educating legislators. And if there is an issue area, whether it's with certain low enrollment programs or with admin to student ratio, then we need to address those rather than just arbitrary cuts over the top.
Does anyone else have a question? I see. Yep. Go ahead,
I
Kathy.
do, Speaking of President Reeves, there was a very small gathering here last week. Trustee Tom Walters, who was formerly a representative from Natrona County, he had a small gathering, and the president came up to look at the UWC center. I mean, they have a very large presence here on Casper College campus. And I got to the meeting early because I wanted to talk with him before everybody else got there and wanted to talk to him. But my impression was that he is very open to continued collaboration around expanding the offerings that UW has, not only at UWC, but in other parts of the state. And truth be told, the community colleges, they're the biggest feeder to the university. So I'm glad he's going to be in Riverton next week. And I'm glad you brought up Lori Nichols. I remember when she became president, she was up here at Casper College the next week, I think, visiting with people. So I think I'm very hopeful a new era of collaboration between all of us is ahead for us. And I think the WIP was very instrumental in bringing that forward, in my opinion.
Well, and that's right. I mean, I think instead of focusing on just enrollment numbers, increasing enrollment, it doesn't matter what that looks like, of how we talk about completion and looking at how a lot of these kids that have higher completion rates when they go through the community college system, and so that being our focus and more of a partnership. I mean, that's a huge opportunity. It should be about an individual child or student and their pathway and what they can, succeed at, rather than just numbers and enrollment.
Absolutely.
I'm going to pivot a little bit here to drill down a little bit more on career and technical education. I've been part of a small work group that's been meeting since the legislative session to talk about, the big picture items, but also what are some low-hanging fruit that we can kind of wrap our hands around and actually make some change. But your thoughts, Megan, on delivery of CTE, coordination and resources with K-12, how we can better meet the needs of our workforce. So it's a pretty broad question, but I know it's something that's been a platform for you. So can you elaborate a little bit more in that space?
Sure. And this is something we've started to pilot with CWC, kind of a CTE initiative of how do we bring school districts around with a community college. And what we were finding from CWC was, they were saying, look, we have all these resources. We have this incredible program. We want to partner with K-12. But how do we bring that all together? And particularly in Fremont County, when you have 8 school districts, can really be a challenge. But it's difficult, right, with 48 school districts to have all of them have all of the resources and CTE programs and offering. It's just such a missed opportunity if we're not partnering stronger with our community colleges and the certification programs that you all have. And so I think that can be replicated. I mean, there's a lot, and how do you keep autonomy within areas that it's going really well? I mean, we've got a lot of school districts that are partnering extremely well with community colleges. Then we start to talk about dual and concurrent and what that looks like and who's paying for what. And so I think those are kind of the details that we still need to work through. But I think that's a tremendous area of success that we have between our school districts and our community colleges. So that's something that I want to continue to advocate for. I know the legislature, that is one area where they were positive about increasing funding. And so that's exactly what I want to focus on as well.
A reminder that we, and I'm going to say we collectively, as I look up at my trustees and presidents who are here, a reminder that we often have to give to some of our legislative friends is that the colleges are more than just career CTE delivering institutions. They truly are comprehensive, and we talked about transfer to UW and also just the role that they play in their communities. So that is a message that we are really trying to remind folks that because some folks probably want to turn the colleges just into technical institutions. And so we play a big role in reminding them that there's more to it than just CTE, but it is a critical component.
I think the comprehensive piece is extremely important for the community colleges. We need to develop those soft skills also. And you can't always do that when somebody is coming for maybe just a 6-month certificate. But in the big picture, I think there's a cultural shift that's going to have to take place, and with the legislature and maybe even some of the people in K-12. But looking at, I don't know what kind of career counselors they have, Megan, and you mentioned the counselors. I mean, they're just trying to handle some of the mental health issues, huh, and the testing. And do they even, is a career counselor, or do they even have those in the school anymore? Someone to fund positions that will really bridge that gap between high school and the CTE offerings to make kids aware of careers and a lot of different things.
Hmm. And I would add too on a couple of those points, Aaron, of kind of that comprehensive education and beyond CTE. I mean, especially as we look to shift in K-12 of competency-based learning, where kids are moving at a quicker pace, depending on where they're at. Being able to offer them, courses and accelerated learning within the community college is huge, as they pursue their eventual, degrees. And so that's a big opportunity. And Kathy, it depends. Districts, operate in different ways, but there are job coaches now that are kind of separate from mental health counseling, but that's not part of the funding model. And so they're electing to do that, and finding, having to find ways to pull from elsewhere. And so I think if we're serious as a state about that coordination, then we need to come together on how that is funded and formulated. But to have that kind of conduit between business and industry, between our higher education systems, for that kid to make sure that they're in a pathway that makes sense for them.
Thank you.
Something that I might add to get you thinking too, Megan, is a couple of things. How can we do a better job of making data-based decisions? We do have the SLEDS, the Statewide Longitudinal Education Data System. Years ago, it used to be, I used to say it was a 4-letter word because people didn't understand what it was. It was a struggle to get it funded. And I think some of the roadblocks we had with it, but we are getting results out of that. Can you speak to more about what SLEDs could offer for us potentially, but the role that we need to, I think, collectively look towards economic development across our state. So I'm thinking of using data to make decisions and the role that the colleges can play in that. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I think it's going to be huge. And I actually think that helps us even more with the legislature to be able to tell the story and show them actual numbers. And yes, this has been quite a work in progress, and I'm really excited. I mean, we're really getting there, where we can have now real data. And I spent a lot of time talking to Laurel Ballard about this as it's been built out. My understanding is that to actually take it to the next level and to fully implement, we are going to probably have to come with a supplemental budget request. And so we need to talk about what that looks like and how to convey that with our legislature. But I think that data piece is really going to be big and kind of winning hearts and minds in the legislature where it can be really difficult to do. And so, anxious to be able to use that. And I think that really does link our K-12 data with higher education. And so excited for where that's going to go after, gosh, how many years of kind of up and down with getting that implemented. So, and then what was the last part of your question there? Was it just on sleds?
Uh, Economic development.
Oh, yes, that's right.
How can we, yeah, tie that all together?
That's right. That's exactly, I think, what this kind of ecosystem is about, and kind of bringing business and industry. And I'm actually really excited about WIP going into Wyoming Business Alliance. I think that that will be a really great fit to kind of build this. And as we start talking about, future of the Business Council and overall statewide vision for economic development, we have to make sure that our programs are aligned to that, and education system is also, in collaboration. And so I think that that will be a great conduit through WIP. To be able to continue to build that. We've done a lot of work through this Wyoming Future of Learning partnership that we've kind of built out. And so I'd like to see that continue, that I know you all have come into the fold on as well. And I think that could be a great spot where we're all kind of rowing in the same direction, because I think that that's where a lot of our issues occur. If we've got, this initiative here and we're building economic development, but we're not bringing along our education system in that conversation.
I think I'm sorry, Lisa, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, feel free to finish out the economic conversation. I was just going to ask a question about working with K-12 and sleds and data and stuff like that, but go ahead, Jenna.
Well, I think the economic development conversation has been so varied across the state. I find economic development to be extremely important. We're very excited. I'm very excited for BWXT, Nucleon, all of those companies that are looking in the northeast corner of Wyoming. So there's been some programs from the governor's office that have helped with that. And I'm sorry, I'm remiss on what those funds are called. Will you continue to support those? Because as Aaron said, and I'm sure President Watson, as we continue to expand not only those funds, but funding, we have new programs we have to start in order to train their workforce. So going back to the WIP, while that's transitioning, but would you support funding for colleges to start new programs, sustain new programs? All of those pieces impact what we do across the state. So.
Exactly. And I think that conversation of when we're bringing in industry and when we're looking at, you're probably referring to the energy dominance funds or the, Wyoming Energy Authority, those funds. And especially, I've been bullish on, especially when these funds are going to lead to a return on investment. I don't know why we would be opposed to them. And we're competing, in a space where other states are vying for industry as well. And so I think the important thing is how we're identifying the ones that are going to have a net benefit to our state. And when they're centered around energy, they're going to. And so that's incredibly important for us to continue that work. And then to your point of how do we, in that conversation, make sure we're building at the same time? Because I think where it could be, I would assume, frustrating for you all is we start, plowing in that direction, but then we're going to run into the workforce pipeline issue. And if we don't have those programs in place, they can't then catch up. And we're back to this same issue. And so, I've even been in meetings where I've been talking with potential data centers about, well, how can we come to the table and we can have a public-private partnership to build out some of the trade programs that we need to be able to build these things. And so I think those it shouldn't be reactive to when we have those programs, but actually at the same time, how are we talking about education? And that's what I really hope to bring in this office, because education is so front of mind to me, of that we don't get too far ahead of economic development, that we're not bringing the education programs. And so that's to say, okay, well, who do you need to fill these jobs? What training do they need? Do we offer those at our, community colleges or university? If not, then let's build those programs. And that should all be in the same conversation.
Sure, absolutely. Some of the leads that have come to us in the Powder River Basin have come from the Wyoming Business Council. Mm. Wyoming Business Council has been under some significant fire, but boy, we've had a lot of referrals and some growth because of the work that they're doing. WIP has transitioned under the Wyoming Business Council. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts and how we'll continue to grow that organization strongly.
Yeah, I think reform that needs to take place should come from the executive, and we need to bring, a reformed outlook to the legislature. Again, that's an area kind of like the university where I don't think arbitrary cuts and just completely, destroying it and dismantling is the way to go, because we do have a lot of success stories. I think it's just, again, getting back on the same page. And I've spent many coffee sessions with Josh Durrell talking about how do we look at telling the story better, how do we look at focusing better too, and making sure we are rowing in the same direction. And so, I want to ensure that with all of these programs, we address these issues before they blow up in the legislature. We've got to, because this isn't good for anyone. It sends a bad message about Wyoming and being open for business. But that said, I do think there's some reforms that need to take place there. And how do we rethink some of those programs, on the State Loan and Investment Board. We were starting to move in the right direction of moving away from, splash pads and community halls, and the Business Council was doing a good job doing that. I just think that story and where they were headed was delayed in getting to the legislature and people. And so I think it's reform there. It's bringing all these things together: WIP, workforce services, business council, energy authority. Before I even decided to run for this office, I brought together a group of School of Energy Resources, business council, and energy authority, and kind of getting us to talk about, and this is in my role as on the State Loan and Investment Board, how are we rowing in the same direction? Because everyone's kind of trying to fix this problem, but bringing us together in a stronger, more consistent way.
Go
Who
ahead,
said?
Lisa.
Yeah, sorry.
So Megan, I guess I have a couple questions if it's okay. I appreciate the conversation we're having. So many of the community colleges we sit in isolated rural sections of the state, and we're serving big, areas as far as service regions are concerned. And when we serve everybody in different ways, whether we're condensed in population or we're all over the place. But one of the things I'm curious about is kind of your thoughts on alignment. I've been in this job now for about 6 years, and I realize as I sit on some of these boards and as I try to build relationships with my school districts and things like that, that the community colleges really do serve a very strong role in helping to coordinate and bring people together. And it's interesting to me, like we talk about business councils and some of our different boards and councils and things that we're talking about, that there's definitely opportunity that seems ripe for development as it relates to growing jobs and offering programs that make sense for the state. So I'm kind of curious, and I'll throw education in there because I think it's the big conversation, right? We have, like, if you look at our high school kids if you look at our high school kids in the Bighorn Basin, 20% of that population comes to Northwest College for dual and concurrent coursework. Of that 20%, 15% transition on to Northwest College because they choose, depending on the number of credit attainment they have, then and I would love that to be higher. It used to be higher, but that's part of the reason that students are getting credits and they're transferring on. And then, like, of that, after the 15%, I think 8% go to the university, maybe 10%, and then like 2%, 3% go to other colleges. But I'm in a CPA, I should be running my numbers on my 10K here. But at the end of the day, when you look at the pie, 43% of our students are not doing anything at the end of the year. And I have 9 school districts, 10 high schools, and I like to say 37 philosophies out there that I'm trying to marry with. And I'm not trying to be critical. I'm trying to figure out, how do I serve all of these folks while I'm sitting on Forward Cody and I'm sitting on PEP and I'm listening to these business needs and trying to build relationships with businesses. And so I'm just kind of curious because I want to know if those 43% are not coming, that they got the skills they need in high school, or if they need more skills, that we could give that to them so that they can either step out at that point in time, or we can get them onto university. I think there's capacity for us without stepping on top of each other 24 hours a day with the enrollment argument or the marketing piece. What's your thoughts about alignment in those areas? Because maybe it's the maturation of me and my job. I'm sitting here going, wow, there's a lot of opportunity that we're losing here because we're not very well aligned.
Yes.
All right, we're trying to be, but we're not.
Well, and it's
Yeah.
hard because like we've dealt like some of the issues with Cody, right? Like there's not a BOCES, correct?
Yeah,
And so that's
right.
been really hard. And so now you have differing opportunities across the state when it comes to that partnership. And so that's not good. And I think that's created, some friction in ways. And so I'll go back to, I think, first and foremost on sleds and having data to show some of this. I think that's where we've all just kind of been disconnected and everyone's doing their best. But to your point, there's a lot of opportunity to actually bridge this together. And I don't think we're operating in an equal manner. And you talk about equitability of our K-12 system, honestly, like that could be part of this lawsuit of, is it equitably being provided to students these opportunities that you're talking about? And I don't think it is, because who has a BOCES, who doesn't, who has this strong partnership? And so
Right.
I think that should be our role at the state level to be able to do. And I do look at WIP as that should be the connecting, entity to do that. So I'm 100% with you. I think the data sharing will be better. I think looking at more of the digital wallet and expanding that so that we actually can see using AI and technology to how to piece that together. Because again, we've done a good job, but it's not as streamlined as it probably should be.
Well, and that's
We
why I
have so many
appreciate the
districts.
comment about like efficiencies around state operations and stuff like that too, because the problem is everything is expensive. We just know it is. But is there alignment that we could get that would, make us a little bit more efficient as we think about working together? My school districts are great, and I work really hard to build those relationships and try to sustain and try to meet people where they are. We're offering CDL all over the county in different high schools, and we're going out and we have kids coming in taking welding classes, and we have transfers, and people, the legislators get a little talk about being worried about what courses our students are taking. Sleds will tell you, because we have a flyer, that the vast majority of our students who are taking college classes are in that top 5 part of the funnel, which is your gen eds where you need to be. And then after that, you start to serve the student at where they want to be. I don't think we have a lot of waste going on in terms of randomly signing people up for classes. At least I'll tell you in my area, I don't think we do. And I look forward to working with those school districts. I also look forward to trying to figure out how we can put some energy into working with the businesses and meeting their needs better. And that's what I would really love to see the governor help us support.
And I think it's even, in my dream world and what we've started to talk about in K-12 is how do you measure, a student's experience outside of the classroom during summer, during breaks, when they get to their senior year. And you're right. I mean, the numbers we're looking at of how many have completed all their coursework, and it's just that time, that precious time that is being almost wasted. And sure, they're working or doing other things with that time, but what an opportunity there to really plug into. But how do we at the state make sure that then we're not kind of at conflict of who's paying for what? Some school districts are almost disincentivized to graduate kids or have them move forward quicker. And so how do you make sure? And a lot of those conflicts, they come down to funding and who's paying for what and being scared to lose funding. And so recognizing going upstream in that of how are we addressing that issue so that we can partner more in this area. But how are you looking at a kid's experience and where they're, I want to take it further to when they're at the Boys and Girls Club, is that aligned with standards? How can that be applied as part of, their educational wallet, I guess, so to speak, and just thinking differently that way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Megan. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. It's so funny when we're sitting at 9:20 and we think, how are we going to fill the hour? And we absolutely do. And so I'm really pleased for everyone, or pleased that everyone was able to join us today. And Megan, thank you for your time. We have a few minutes left if you'd like to kind of round it up with anything, or we have time for another question. So it's really kind of up to the will of the group. But I'll give you that opportunity if you'd like.
Well, I just want to thank everyone and for your work. I think we've got a lot of exciting opportunity here, and so I look at that optimistically. As an opportunity, not as much of a challenge. And for me, I don't know everything about everything, but I know how to bring people together, and I know how to problem solve. And so if we can come together on this. And not just have another study, but actually meaningfully have our initiative areas and then metrics to be able to measure it. I think that's where we can get. And all these pieces, that's what's so exciting to me. We have these pieces. We're doing this great work. How does it all come together? And I think that is the job of the next governor, is to fully build those bridges and unite it, because we've had almost a decade of this progress, and so bringing that together is going to be, I think, the most important thing, and then bringing the legislature on board too, because we've got to, and right now it's a very divisive environment. And I think especially between executive and legislative, and that's where I think we cannot go an extreme or the other. We've got to right size that and bring back that partnership again if we really want to move forward on everything we're talking about.
Well, sometimes in Wyoming, we're really good at bringing together people and solving hard problems, and sometimes we silo ourselves to
Yep.
the nth degree. So, I think we're all here. We stand ready. We're not leaving. We're we're willing to work, and just want to say that we're very grateful for you and your time. So, thank you for that, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'll get this posted up on our WACCT website as well. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. Give me about a day or so I can work with our folks to get it up there. But Ms. Degenfelder, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
You.
Thank you, Eric, for organizing this.